Well, it is hard to believe, but this February it will be a decade since the PlayStation Vita was released, and the Vita is a system that I've had a love hate relationship with over the years. I've recently started collecting for it again, and I thought there was no better time to do a personal history than right now. So I don't know how others feel, but certainly when the Vita was announced, I was pretty hyped for it. I had discovered the PSP rather late in its life cycle, and I enjoyed what Sony was trying to do with the PSP. It felt a little bit more mature, a little bit more sophisticated as a piece of hardware than, say, the Nintendo DS. And with the PSP, I love the fact that, as I've said before, it was the system that I think carried the legacy of the PlayStation 1 into the mid to late 2000s. So I really enjoyed that, and I was excited to see what the Vita could do. Obviously, I think the sales pitch for the Vita was that it was going to do all of that, but it would also offer console quality games, PS3 quality games, and it just looked like a natural evolution of a Sony handheld. I picked up the Vita probably 2 months after it came out. I actually found it very lightly used. It was the 3G model, although I never activated the 3G service. And one of the things that stood out for me was just how high quality the hardware felt. This felt like, a really slick, high-end device. Still probably the best feeling handheld that I've used. So I think one of the reasons it felt that way was the OLED screen. I mean, OLED is becoming a standard today, but back then, it was really unique. And I felt that it produced, obviously, deep blacks. I mean, not on the level of, say, an LG or Sony OLED television, but it gave the visuals a pop. And it was something that was just such a leap above what the PSP could do. The buttons felt crisp. The analog sticks, to this day feel very, very solid. The rear touchpad is still very effective in the games that utilize it. And just that glossy piano finish. In 2022, it just feels still very, very high quality. Now, that's not to say that the hardware itself is perfect. I mean, it has two glaring issues, and the first of which is, I think, the reason why the system ultimately was unsuccessful, and that is the storage or the lack of storage. To this day, it is incredibly difficult to find a reasonably priced PS Vita memory card, and ultimately that became a hindrance to you actually enjoying the system because you'd constantly have to either pay up to get new memory cards or you'd have to delete games and saves, and it was just an unfathomable decision by Sony to limit you in this way. I mean, ostensibly it was to fight the rampant piracy of the PSP, but it just ruined a lot of the fun that you could have with the system. Now, I realize that there have been workarounds and, different homebrew type solutions. I haven't tried them yet. It's something that I will look into, but just from that standpoint, it was unfortunate that that decision was made, and I think it led to the early demise of the system. Now, the other hardware issue was the OLED screen. I found that over time, it is susceptible to burn-in. If you kind of look at it from a certain angle, particularly like when a scene fades to dark in a game, you'll see not so much image retention, sort of specific images or elements of the UI burned into it, but more so like a smear, an OLED smear that goes away when the game is being played, but it just kind of looks nasty after a while. And quite frankly, the first Vita that I got um, was prone to this, as is the white one, which is a Japanese version of the Vita that I picked up not too long ago, only because it seemed to be in excellent condition, and it really was, aside from that issue. So in 2012 and 2013, I was really enjoying the system, and then particularly because of the fact that the releases as time went on started to dwindle, and of course the aforementioned memory card issue, and I think I was only ever able to get an 8 gigabyte memory card. I just wasn't going to pay $100 for storage. I kind of moved away from the Vita. It became significantly less interesting, and I was actually still playing the PSP a little bit more. But as time went on, the Vita became a little bit more interesting, particularly because it was a failed console. And I think when you have the benefit of hindsight, you can look at certain consoles that didn't succeed in their time and discover something unique about them. And what I think that unique point is with the Vita is represents kind of a transitional moment in mobile gaming, or perhaps just gaming in general. It was incredibly high tech. A lot of the ideas that started on the Vita ultimately found their way into the consoles we play today. For example, just the suspend game feature, the idea that you could kind of just put it into a rest mode, fire it up, and pick up right where you left off. To my knowledge, the Vita was the first system to really do that in the way it's being done today. I realized that the PSP you could kind of shut off, but I don't think it was in that kind of deep rest mode like the Vita. It had strong network features. It had the PlayStation Store. It really did. It had. It was kind of like the forerunner to what the PSP and PS5 would become as far as an ecosystem for gaming. But it also made a bet that ultimately failed, and that bet was people on the go would want a dedicated high-end gaming system to use over their cell phones. And I think smartphone technology evolved so quickly that it quickly overtook what the Vita could do. Now, I would argue that that's something Sony should have known. I mean, Sony to this day is a manufacturer of smartphones, but with the acceleration of Android and just the incredible strides that happened, say, between 2015 and 2020 with smartphones, it became silly to want or pay for a dedicated handheld gaming device. And in that sense, I think the Vita is ultimately the last traditional gaming handheld. Now, obviously, we have the Switch, and a lot of people, because I've always said this is kind of a part of doing business with Nintendo, you always have to say, oh, well, I could play this on the go. I could play, this game, even though it's more expensive and performs worse than the Steam or the PS4 counterpart, I can play it on the go. Well, yes, the Switch is a portable handheld. They even have the Switch, whatever it is, the cheaper Switch that is just basically a portable and can't be hooked up to a television. But to me, the Switch is a hybrid console, and it's still better played hooked up to the dock, whereas the Vita was a true portable console. And you could kind of see this evolution in the types of games that were released for the Vita. The console ports, or the good as console versions, as they claimed, never was quite true, but that was the aspiration, starting with that. And some of them, I think, really were impressive. And then ending its life as a niche anime game, visual novel, limited run collector's console. So it sort of spanned these two moments in gaming. And it needed to find a new identity once the smartphone had taken it over. Now, not a good deal if you were buying it, you were invested in the platform during its life cycle, but as a collector, that becomes very interesting to collect for all the different moments of the Vita. Admittedly, its last couple of years have become very expensive to collect for, and really were if you were buying and keeping up with all of the limited run releases. So I'll conclude by talking about my four. So I'll conclude by talking about the four games that I really enjoyed when I was invested in the system. And the first would be Persona 4 Golden. Now, I think this is the game that really made the Vita stand out. People either discovered the game again or discovered it for the first time on the Vita. And I think the Vita was really the ideal platform for it. I had played through about half of it on the PS2. I loved it. Obviously, it is a classic game. So the Vita version, and of course at this point I can't remember the specific game elements that were improved, but it really benefited from that screen. I think the screen really extracted so much of the beauty of the art style that you just didn't have when, like me, I was playing this game on a CRT television with the PlayStation 2 back in, I guess it came out in 2008, 2009. So discovering the game again, playing through it, it was, I think, the perfect package. And I would strongly encourage anyone who is trying to get into Vita collecting to play it. This version's also available on Steam, and I think it'll be interesting to play it on the Steam Deck. But it was just kind of the perfect fit for the Vita. Next game I picked up during its life cycle that I really enjoyed was Virtua Tennis 4. Virtua Tennis 4 is a great game, and it was wonderful on the PlayStation 3. It was actually an excellent game on whatever it was, Games for Windows Live, which kind of was a pain in the ass to use, but once you got into the game, and you could also buy it through Steam, it was, I think, the best Virtua Tennis, and the Vita did it justice. It was just a lot of fun. It was smooth. It just felt like a high-quality version of this game, and you weren't really losing all that much. Plus, with the Vita version, you did not have to deal with Games for Windows Live, and you didn't have to fire up the PlayStation 3. So I think this is one, as a sports title, still might be a little more reasonably priced, so definitely one to look at. And me being me, I had to pick up a Mahjong game, which I think was a release title in Japan. It's called Mahjong Fight Club. It's a series by Konami, and at the time it was one of the sleekest Mahjong games that you could play. Had a good online tournament ranking system. It had a kind of a techno soundtrack. Everything about it was crisp. It utilized the touchscreen. It was a really great game of Mahjong. Now, this is not something that will interest anyone, but if I had to think about the four titles that defined my time with the Vita, this would be one of them. And lastly, a game I've talked about in the past, but a game that I think nonetheless is emblematic of what the Vita became, and that is Root Letter. It was the first visual novel that I played on the Vita, and it was one of those games that helped me overcome my prejudice against the genre. I had thought visual novels were more or less anime fan service projects, or kind of like just part of the merchandising arm of a manga or anime, but this was, to my knowledge, an original game, or if it was based on some other property, it was one that certainly I had never heard of. It had a wonderful art style. It had an engaging adult story, and it just managed, through its masterful intricacy and the attention to detail put into every element, every screen of this game, to draw you into the small world, the small town world in Japan as you were trying to unravel a mystery. So it kind of woke me up to the fact that visual novels could be an interesting genre. And it really showed me something about the Vita that I really have grown to cherish to this day. And the fact that it was one of the first games that I could actually play, truly play in bed. I was never someone who would just kind of like lay in bed with a handheld. I would always just sort of sit at a desk and play it. But I think the form factor of the Vita made it very comfortable to kind of hold and play in bed. And I found this style of game to be very relaxing. And because of the game suspend feature, I could, play for 15, 20 minutes, get drowsy, pick up with it the next night. So it was a genre and a new way of playing a video game that really appealed to me. And since then, I've discovered other visual novels on the Vita that have fulfilled that same kind of relaxing intent, although I would say Root Letter is the best of the breed, at least that I've played. And you can get this on the Switch. You can get it on Steam. I would highly encourage people to check it out because I think it is one of the truly unique games that I've ever played. So the kind of final question, perhaps, to ask about the Vita is it worth collecting for this console in 2022? And I think that is an open question. I think if you've never owned it and you want to discover some of the better titles for the Vita, they can be had on Steam and on the Switch for much less money. The Vita has become, I think, I'm not going to say prohibitively expensive because you can buy games for, say, under $40, but the better titles, the more sought after titles can push $50 to $60 to $80 or more. And if you have kind of a completionist mentality and you're looking for really the late stage releases from limited run, they're in the hundreds of dollars. So I think it's probably not worth it if you're someone who just wants to experience the games. If you are a dedicated collector, if you have, if you've built a collection, particularly during the lifetime of the system, and you're looking to just explore those last couple of games you never got to, I still think it's worthwhile. And if you're someone who enjoys physical hardware, I think the hardware still stands up to this day. The hardware itself can probably be had for between $80 to $200, depending on if you want the cleanest version in a box and things like that. PlayStation TV, I know, or Vita TV was, I think, hacked and has some expanded functionality, and you can kind of get around the limitation that if the game required the touchpad, it wouldn't work. I can't think of the exact name of the custom firmware for that, but that might be an avenue to get into the Vita. But it is worth exploring, and I think it's become properly retro, and it certainly is a system that I've learned to enjoy the older it's become.